Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we will take a look at some new Just No HOA content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
First one is titled, Move the Boat Please. After moving into our new home in a subdivision with a homeowner association, I received a call from my wife while at work. She informed me that we had just been visited by a contingent of officers of our HOA. She further told me that they were going to make us move our fence. Backstory. When initially looking at the model home, I asked for and received a copy of the HOA covenants and read them cover to cover. I was particularly interested in whether or not homeowners were permitted to have boats on their property. I found that boats were permitted as long as they could not be seen from the street. I agreed to purchase the home if the builder would pour a concrete boat pad beside the garage, thinking that I could put up gates in front of the pad blocking the view from the street. The builder agreed and we purchased the home. When I arrived home, I asked my wife what happened and was informed of the following. 3 HOA officers visited and were informed that I was at work. They congratulated her on a beautiful home but mentioned that we would have to move the gates as they were forward of the middle of the house and fences are not permitted in the front yard, per the HOA covenants. They then said, "Your husband is the fishing guide, isn't he?" When she replied yes, he said that they all like to fish and he was sure something could be worked out. They left. I called the number that was provided and one of these gentlemen answered. I said that my wife had told me that they visited and what they had said. I told them that I would be happy to take them fishing. All we had to do was to come up with an agreeable date and of course, my fee was $400 per day. He replied, "I don't think you understand." I said that I understand perfectly. I then said that you may be able to force me to move my gates, but let me tell you what will happen if you do. I will head out to the farming area and find the rustiest, beat-up piece of crap automobile I can find, park it in my driveway and put a 9-foot satellite antenna on the roof of the car and there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. Read your covenants. I then hung up. Never heard another word from them. Next one is titled, I Fought the HOA and I Won. This story takes place in Ontario, in the city of Kawartha Lakes, one of the worst municipalities in all of Ontario in which to live. There's poverty, crime, drug addiction, a culture of prideful ignorance, and die-hard partisan voters that will vote against their best interests time and time again. And if you paid attention to the news recently, their OPP detachment shot and killed a 1-year-old. The city council are looting their tax base to provide free educational opportunities for unqualified staffers they hired, holding secret meetings behind the public's back and in one case spent $140K to fight a lawsuit that was levied against them after they blocked a brand new business's access road because some city council members owned a competing businesses. They were fined $70K, and spent another $70K of taxpayer dollars to appeal and lose. That's all backstory. Suffice it to say it's a city run by uneducated rubes and inhabited by the most apathetic voters I've ever encountered. My old man was an original property owner of an unassumed road for 50+ years. For the uninitiated, this means that although the city owned the road, they are not responsible for maintenance, grooming, etc. beyond the scope of the limited service agreement they made with a single property owner, who we later found out forged signatures, claiming he represented the entire road. The LSA basically meant they would do 2 gradings per year, though they only actually provided 1. About 20 years ago, some city idiots, moved up on the road and decided they would create a HOA. They didn't get insured, they didn't incorporate and they thought they could go around forging signatures on city documents and charging residents money for essentially nothing. It all came to a head about 10 years ago. My dad refused to pay them until the 2 chuckleheads in charge showed him how they spent the money. Rather than provide a fair accounting of the neighborhood funds, the president, and the treasurer, both decided they wanted to sue for the money owing. Well, we went to court and it turns out that you don't just get to declare yourself the head of an association that doesn't exist. Turns out you can't collect money from the residents and spend it on cookware and paying their unqualified, uninsured friends to do roadwork. Turns out perjury is frowned on in a small claims court. They found out the hard way. I discovered in their court filings examples of perjury, fraud and general dishonesty. They manufactured documents and got caught doing so. They were given multiple options to settle in court, but turned them all down, instead choosing to self-destruct in the most absurd and stubborn way available to them. None of their witnesses showed up. They brought literally no evidence with them to court, instead relying on the phrase, "It's not rocket science," and they somehow assumed the judge would accept, "It's not rocket science," as some kind of evidence or as somehow lending credibility to their claims. He didn't. The HOA lost and ended up owing us money. The HOA dissolved immediately afterwards, and if the story ended there, it would make sense, but not be a very interesting story. But you're not here for just a "good guys win" story, you want satisfaction. Turns out one of those two old men that fancied themselves in charge of the HOA couldn't accept defeat. Our driveway lights started to disappear, and someone was blocking the culvert in the middle of the night and washing out the road in front of my dad's house. Minor vandalism was happening almost on a nightly basis. So, I came home late one night, and sure enough, this 70-year-old moron is thrashing about in the April temperature swamp, having fallen in after blocking the culvert. He's got his shirt tangled in an underwater branch and can't get out. We had to haul him out because he was so drunk and suffering from hypothermia that he couldn't even move. Then we called the cops. He got yelled at, trespassed, and no driveway lights ever went missing again, and the cops let me keep the trashcan lid he was using to block the culvert. Free lid. Moral of this story is don't take crap off a HOA. They may look official, but I'll bet you most HOAs are doing something shady that will reflect poorly on them in court should you find yourself at odds with them. Next one is titled, "Won a Fence Dispute." January. Submit plans to HOA Design Committee for a swimming pool. Given the "okay" and told the project looks beautiful. Lead developer actually contacts pool builder for a pool of his own. March. Landscaper comes to me asking if my neighbors can have some limestone steps built alongside their house, but would come into my property by about 4 feet. Knowing that I'm building a pool and landscaping with it, as well as a fence, I say no. He comes back a bit later saying they would like to buy a sliver of my land so they can have their steps. I say no again, though I considered giving them a purposely ridiculous price. They ask him to ask me to sell the land a few more times, until I finally tell him they need to approach me directly, instead of sending a poor landscape salesman to negotiate. Quick backstory on the neighbors. He's on our state's Board of Regents, and is the president of the company my father worked for 35 years. My dad was a sales rep, and used to be on commission. One year, the sales team knocked it out of the park, many of them taking home 6 figures. The next year, they were all put on salary. On one occasion, my dad asked for a raise, and my neighbor denied him, saying, "We've looked at your situation, and decided you make enough for a family of your size in this area." Meanwhile, my neighbor lives in a gigantic mansion. Fast forward to now. I live in one of the nicest neighborhoods in my town. Have worked super hard to get where I am, wasn't born with a silver spoon. When my neighbors moved in, they have reminded me several times that they're downsizing, whatever. They love their smaller lot because it's easier to maintain. They know who my dad is, but I'm not sure if they know we aren't exactly too fond of them for trying to keep their workforce from becoming as successful as they could. Basically, I'm not giving these people anything. August. Pool gets completed and I have the fence built. That very evening, I can see the neighbors in their sunroom looking at my yard, and their body language is not positive. A couple days later, one of the contractors working on the pool tells me he thinks the neighbors aren't happy with my fence. Someone pulled up in a truck and started taking pictures of it, etc. Of course they aren't. Their downsized house is so close to the edge of their lot, my fence doesn't give them a lot of room. The HOA requires 3 feet of clearance off the property line. The fence is so close to their house, I actually become concerned that it's on their property line. I order a survey, and it comes back saying I'm clear by 5.5 feet in the front, and 10 feet in the back. Phew. Same night I get the survey results, the head of the HOA calls me and tells me the fence is on the property line and I have to move it. I say, actually, I was concerned it was less than 3 feet away, so I had a surveyor verify its position, and it's actually 5 and 10 feet away. He seemed surprised, but also fairly skeptical. So I have the surveyor forward the results, and he emails me asking me to have them put stakes in the ground over the property pins so he can see for himself. As I was taking the trash out this morning, I was greeted by the surveyors. They asked me if I was having neighbor problems, and I quickly explained they thought the fence was on their property and was just as quickly reassured that I was good to go. Anyway, the neighborhood block party and HOA meeting are being hosted at the neighbor's house later this month, and I'm not sure whether I should show up and act like a smug a hole, or just throw a pool party in my own yard at the same time. Edit. Seriously, thank you all for pointing out the ways that this could escalate or go south for me, especially through adverse possession. This is something I am taking very seriously, and I will be contacting my lawyer to make sure that I will be protected in the long run. I'll also be going to the HOA meeting, as many have suggested. I'll be on my best behavior, as I'm actually quite used to schmoozing with people I have nothing in common with due to my old job as a broadcaster. Next one is titled, Neighbor Installed Road on My Property. Short update. I spoke to a lawyer who is helping take care of time-sensitive issues, and will help me through this. As I feared for my safety, I will not be visiting the home until this is resolved. Location equals Nebraska. Anyway, my property is 160 acres total, and I have 4 40-acre lots that line up. Most of it is heavily wooded, except a small clearing close to one of the roads that borders it, where the cane is. I have 2 neighbors to my east, one of which had the same setup as me, and the next has, I don't know how much, but the north-south line is the same as mine and my immediate neighbor. For the sake of visualization let's number the lots 1 through 4 going north to south. My cabin is in number 4, and my neighbor had a cabin in his number 4 as well. He recently sold his 1, 3, and 4. 3 and 4 to the same person, and 1 to someone different that built a house there as well. Well, he kept 2, and he built a house on 2. Since he didn't have any access, and the people that bought his land didn't want to let him go through their land, he decided to install a road through my woods. He cut a J-shaped road through my 1, alongside his former 1, that hooked into his 2, and also went into my 2. In order to do this he cut down a few dozen trees, filled in a pond, and built a bridge over a small stream. The path is about 9 feet wide give or take, and has a thick coating of gravel on it. The bridge he built seems to be up to spec, at least it doesn't look like it's about to fall down. When I confronted him about this, he told me that since it had been there for more than 60 days, I have no rights to tell him to stop using the road he built, nor can I block him from using it. I tried putting a fence up across it. I don't have tools, machinery, so I just sank some poles into the ground and weaved some rope back and forth between it, and hung a plywood board saying, "Do not enter," on it, and he just ran through it with his truck. I've heard of people gaining ownership of land after using it freely for a period of time, but I have no idea how long that is. Furthermore, he's a bit old-fashioned, or I should say a pig-headed sexist, and I'd be afraid to get into a conflict with him out here. Short update. The neighbor had an accident on his property and will no longer be an issue. His heir and I settled out of court. The county is still figuring out how much the fines will be, but they will be quite sizable, and part of the settlement was the agreement that the neighbor's estate will cover all fines due to the work. Last one is titled, HOA Blames Me and My Wife for Everything. When my wife and I were first married, we lived in a condominium complex with a very stupid, uptight HOA. Our condo was owned by my parents who rented it to us. The only reason we could afford it, and most of our neighbors were retirees. Most of our neighbors were actually very sweet, and many we even considered almost adopted grandparents, but there were also a bunch that had nothing but time on their hands to nitpick every tiny problem with the place. Unfortunately, these are also the types of people who apply for HOA positions, and the wonderful part about being the only young couple in the building was that we got blamed for everything. Here are a few incidents. After we were living there for a couple of months, I received a knock on the door from the HOA head. He at least was reasonable but often uninformed and would act on rumors spouted by his batshit crazy board, asking to come in. He then proceeded to give me a lecture about the noise our dog was making, how they had received several complaints, and how we would be fined if we did not calm it down more. Only problem? We didn't own a dog. When he realized this, the guy apologized and left. However, we still received 2 more written warnings from the HOA board until they finally figured it out. The second frustrating incident was shortly after the birth of my son. My wife had had a C-section and was sleeping in the living room because she could not climb into our tall bed. One evening while she was sitting there, she smelled a strong smell of weed and tobacco which made her nauseous. When I walked outside our condo into the lobby to check, I noticed a heavy haze and strong smell of weed and tobacco. My wife was very sensitive to smell at the time and the C-section made puking agonizing, and since the building had strict indoor smoking rules, I actually reported the issue via email to the HOA hoping they would do something about it. And what do? 2 days later we get a written letter citing complaints resulting from the smoking haze demanding we stop otherwise we get fined even though we were the first ones to complain. We then get no response when we reply and proceed to get 2 more warnings. The smoking became a regular evening occurrence. They eventually did send us a fine which they quickly dropped once my dad, the actual homeowner, gave them a very angry phone call. The smoking never stopped. Finally, when it was time for us to move out, we informed them 2 weeks in advance that we would have a moving crew, a bunch of friends, coming through. This was in compliance with their rules so they could notify residents and provide covers for the elevator so they wouldn't be damaged. I never hear a response. 2 days before the move, I ran into the new HOA head and remind her of our weekend moving plans. She acknowledges that she received my email and says she will provide me with the equipment the morning of the move. She never does and so we move without it, and we do it without damaging the elevator. And what do? Try to fine my parents for not providing advance notice of the move. That one also didn't go down well for them. There were also tons of other petty things too. Comments about us being noisy late at night even though we both worked and went to bed early. Lots of accusatory questions about things out of place, etc. We were essentially the first pick to blame whenever something went wrong without an immediate explanation. I'm so glad we no longer have to deal with them. Thanks for listening.